So welcome everybody to this latest video on 162 Math. In this video we'll be continuing with the theme of fractions with a focus on how to order fractions. Now before we get started, let's just have a quick refresh on some of the keywords that's used when ordering fractions. Now this is basically ascending and descending. Now, it's really important that you do know what each of these words mean, because obviously getting it wrong will mean that you will lose a mark. Now generally speaking, if a question asked you to write the fractions in ascending order and you wrote it in descending or vice versa, and the order is correct, you'd probably lose 1 mark. But again, you don't really want to take that risk, particularly as most of these questions tend to only be either 2 or 3 marks. So in terms of ascending, this generally means that you are rounding the numbers up from the smallest number first to the largest, and descending means largest to smallest. And again, how I remember this is that A is the starting letter of the alphabet, and again, so starting tends to mean the smallest, and that's basically how I generally remember it. Now there are several ways in which you can order the fractions, and what I'm going to do in this video is basically show you what each of those methods are. Now you may have to change from method to method, or depending on which numbers you've got, how complicated your fractions are. So I wouldn't personally just stick to one method. Obviously try and find one that works for you and gives you the right answer, but you may want to adapt your methods and understand each of the methods and apply it to whichever is going to be easier. Now again, another top tip is that generally speaking, when it comes to ordering fractions, you don't really get any method marks. So you don't get any working out. So worst case scenario, you could guess what the order is going to be, but again, usually speaking, you would lose 1 mark for every incorrect fraction in its place, wherever it is in its place. So if 1 fraction is out of place, you lose 1 mark. If 2 are, you lose 2 marks, etc. So let's have a look at an example question and try and go through all the several methods for you to choose which one's going to be better for you. So in this question, we're asked to write these fractions in ascending order, and what I've got 4 fractions, and I want to write them from smallest to largest. Now this first method, and it's probably the most common method, is to find a common denominator. So in other words, you're finding a common multiple in the denominator. Now here my common denominators are, my denominators are rather 16, 4, 10 and 2. So what I want to do is I want to start by writing out, or maybe not writing out, but figuring out which number appears, or the smallest number that appears in each of these 4 numbers times tables. So here I've got 16, so I've got 16, 32, 48, and then it's going to be 64, and then 80, then I've got 4, 8, 12, 16, and that's going to go forward. Now if I just have a look to see what numbers come up on here, well, 32 is going to appear, 48 is going to appear, 64 is going to appear, and 80 is going to appear. For 10, I've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 and 80. Probably could have got to 80 straight away. And then 2, 4, 6. Basically all those numbers there, but again, looking at which ones are appearing, 80 is going to be my common denominator. Now if I've written out the times tables, I can just simply count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I multiply this first fraction by 5 and this by 5. For the second one, if I count 1, 2, 3, 4 and then count all the way, that's going to be multiplied by 20. So I'm going to multiply this fraction by 20. For the tens, I'm going to be multiplying by 8, so that I'm going to be multiplying that one by 8. And for the next one, I'm going to be going all the way, and that's going to be 40. So what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So what I've got is I've got 5 over 16, then becomes, and multiplying both the top and the bottom by 5, so it becomes 25 over 80. Then I've got a quarter, which is going to be to multiply both numbers by 20, so it's going to be 20 over 80. Then I've got 3 over 10, which if I multiply both numbers by 8, I'm going to get 24 over 80. And with a half, I'm going to get 40 over 80. Now with my denominators all being the same, all I've now got to do is basically focus on the numerators, because the denominators are all the same. Now from this, one thing I would strongly recommend that you do is, as I've got 4 fractions, is not play hangman, but just make sure that I'm not missing a fraction out. So I want the smallest out of these denominators, and the smallest out of these denominators is going to be a quarter. Now I'm going to write the original fraction, although generally speaking on most mark schemes they would allow you to write the equivalent fractions as you've converted it, but I personally would always try and write the original. So always try and write the original fractions. So my first one's a quarter. Now once I've done that, I'm just going to tick it or cross it off so I'm not using it again. The next smallest is 3/10, as it's 24, so I can tick that one off. Then out of the two I've got 25 and 40. Well, 25 is smaller, so it's going to be 5/16, tick that, and then finally a half. And there is my final answer. Now moving on to the same question, but let's have a look at writing a different method. And again, this might be a preferred way. Now this method is where you're writing the denominator as a product of their primes. Now obviously if you have no idea how to write products of their primes, this is something that you might want to look at. And this method is very similar to the first method, but with a little twist. Now looking at this particular question, my denominators are 16, 4, 10 and 2. Now if I write each of those as a product of their primes, now if you've got a calculator, well, you probably opt for option 2, but this is just an alternative way. Now here, writing it as a POTP, or product of their primes, I've got 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Now 4 is 2 times 2, 10 is 2 times 5, and 2 is just 2. Now what I want to try and do is basically try and get all of these products of their primes having the same amount of numbers and the same numbers. So here I've got 2s and 5s, so I want to have each number to have the same number of 5s and the same number of 2s. So here my common sort of denominator is going to be, well, the maximum number of 2s I've got is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and then I've got a 5, so that there is my common denominator, which if I work out is going to be 80. And again, obviously that makes sense as to the previous example. So let me just change this pen just so we've got one that can easily be seen. So here I need to multiply this one by 5. I need to multiply this one by 2 times 2 times 5. This one I need another 3 2s, and this one I need another 3 2s and a 5. So if I simplify the blue fractions, I'm multiplying this one by 5, and let me just actually put it in a different colour. So this, I'm multiplying it by 5. For this one, I'm multiplying it by 2 times 5 times 2, which is going to be 20. This one I'm multiplying it by 8, and here I'm multiplying by 8 times 5, which is 40. And that's then what I would then multiply the tops by. So again, what I would get is 5/16, then becomes, as we did before, 25/80. A quarter becomes 20/80. A 3/10 becomes 24/80, and a half becomes 40/80. And then obviously then it's just a case of comparing which one is which, and again we should get the same answer. So in terms of this, like another way in which some people have wrote their answers is they say, oh, this one's the smallest, so that's number 1. Then we've got number 2, number 3, and then number 4. But I personally wouldn't leave your answers like this, because the question is asking you to write it in ascending order. You haven't written it in ascending order, you've just given what positions they are, and they want it from 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's always important that you do write those fractions. So let's just do exactly that. So I've got quarter, I've got 3/10, I've got 5/16, and then a half. Then moving on to our third one, and again depending on your division skills, so this is where you convert the fraction into a decimal first. So here we've got 5/16. Now when you are converting fractions to decimals, always make sure the denominator goes outside your bus stop and the numerator goes inside the bus stop. So what you want to do is, now here we're doing a bit of long division, because obviously we've got a 2-digit number. So how many 16s going to 5? Well, that's going to be 0, carry the 5. Then how many and then we've got remainder of 5, and then how many 16s going to 50? Well, that's going to be 3, remainder 12. Then how many 16s going to 120? Well, then that's going to be 7, remainder 8. And then how many 16s going to 80? And that's going to be 5. So that, as a decimal, is 0.375. Then, if we then look at our next one, which is a quarter. Now, with a quarter, you should be able to know, but if I didn't, I would just do this. But it should equal 0.25, and that should be something that you should know straight away. Then, moving on to 3/10, another one that you should know. So again, if I didn't, then that's what I'd be doing, and you should find that that there equals 0.3, and then a half, again, something that you should know. Oh, gone for a different colour there. So here we've got a half, and then 2 over 1.0, and that should equal 0.5. And what we then need to do is then put these in order. So looking at this, my smallest, then my second smallest, third smallest, and then my biggest. So then writing this in its in ascending order, we've got a quarter, we've got 3 over 10, we've got 5 over 16, and finally we've got a half. So you can see there that obviously some methods will be easy, some fractions will be easy, but personally speaking, you just want to pick a method that works for you, and you should be able to order those fractions perfect. So let's have a look for one for you to have a go at. So what I'd strongly recommend is pause the video, have a go ordering these fractions in ascending order. So we've got 2/5, a third, 5/10, and 11 over 30. And then once you've finished, we'll go through the answers. So going through the answers for this, so let's first of all pick a method. So here, if you're picking a common denominator, then what you should have gone for, I would say between 5, 3, 10 and 30 is going to be 30. And in terms of converting into a decimal, then we're looking at 2/5 being 0.4, 1/3 being 1.333 recurring, 5 over 10 being 0.5, and 11 over 30 is going to be, I would say, around about 0.36666 recurring. So looking at this, which ones are going to be in our correct order? So again, I set up my 4, in which then what we've got is our smallest is going to be a third, our next smallest is going to be 2/5, and then it's going to be, no it's not, it's going to be 11 over 30. Then it's going to be 2/5, and then finally it's going to be 5 over 10. Now if you did convert it into common denominator, let's just quickly go through, because obviously that a method might get you a method mark, but again, sometimes it's not the case. So here 2/5 over 30, we'll need to multiply it by 6, so that's going to be 12 over 30. 1 over 3 is going to be 10 over 30. 5 over 10 is going to be 15 over 30, and 11 over 30 doesn't need any sort of writing as equivalent fraction because it's already over 30, and there we just need to order those. But that, I would say, is going to be your final answer.